All right, well, I'm going to read 5 poems from my chapbook and then one new one. Some of these poems were written during what Dan later named the mute period, the 12 years before he was taught to communicate by spelling. Dan doesn't remember talking as a toddler, but he did. And this poem was inspired, like many proud parental observations, by proud parental communications by one of his more delightful observations. Nursery rhyme. Some years a single sentence comes, a freak, but I saved everything you ever said from those few early years when you could speak. Beneath each crystal lens, they can be read and understood. I was a careful clerk. I am the reliquary of your words. They would make statues weep, but cannot work the necessary miracle. Unheard, unvoiced, untasted, charming phrases fade, but copied out like prayers, they gain the voice, the lilt of poetry. And weren't they made in flashes of imaginative choice? One snowy afternoon, when talk was cheap, you said to me, "It's raining cats and sheep." One of the things that I enjoy at a great museum is how many Roman copies exist of ancient Greek sculptures. The copies are all different sizes, differently broken, with different parts missing. And if there are enough of them, you can imagine the original. One much copied sculpture is of Aphrodite kneeling at her bath, with arms raised to wind up her long hair. It's also called the Crouching Venus. The history of art is full of pain, sometimes within the work, sometimes inflicted on the body of the work itself by acts of God or vandals, acid rain, or fashion. Later versions have rejected 7 of her belly's folds and creases, smoothed her girth, sucked out her attribute as goddess of inevitable birth, and left her slim, alone. Here, missing pieces are not missed. Coy arms that convolute, her curly head may sit upon a shelf. But on her back, as if to budge the earth, a tiny hand is still attached. I'm wild with sudden grief. I have to find that child. Michael and I spent years learning to create compelling narratives in film and sculpture. So we were deeply dismayed to discover when Dan was little that he could not play symbolically. He missed the stage when children play with toys and give them names, make them fly or kill monsters, or be punished or rewarded. We read him stories, but we couldn't tell whether he could imagine them. He can now, he can write them. But then I could not have imagined that he would someday know the myth of the origin of panpipes, the myth of Pan and Syrinx. Symbolic play. We shoot at dawn in Hackensack. The crew are very young and grouchy. Our makeup girl has lost her pack and made her eyes all red and pouchy. Drinking coffee in this waste, I wonder how to lure my boy from his small world of smell and taste to make the world of thought a toy. Fragile jellies in his brain dream without interpretation. Tangled tracks divert the train that longs to pull into a station. Tireless, we pursue the chance that he will love some plot he reads. How can he, without romance, discover Syrinx in these weeds? Meanwhile, Phragmites gladly grow in areas disturbed by hands. Their amber waves, unstoried, blow across the spongy meadowlands. We change location, feed the cast, requite the love and fuel the sorrow, manufacture fiction fast. We shoot in Huntington tomorrow. At age 48, I began learning the anatomy of poetic form. But when I was 23, I studied human anatomy at the Art Students League with the great Robert Beverly Hale, who was then 80. He had a perfect memory for muscles, tendons, and poems, which he'd recite in class as a way to end his lectures. And this has an epigraph from Hale. First we draw what we see, then we draw what we know. Finally, we see what we know. Robert Beverly Hale, 1901 to 1985. It's called The Meeting of the Light Planes. For years, I thought that Prufrock must be old. Hale closed his lectures by reciting verse, and he was ancient, bony as his chart, though muffled to the chin against a cold we didn't feel. He couldn't teach the heart the way he taught the rib cage, clear and terse, so he gave us O'Shaughnessy and Keats and Eliot. With every class, he'd start from bone, then make you see the skin enfold the skeleton, and on that skin rehearse the mystery of planes, the way they meet in any human form on any street. And I was young. I couldn't see the youth who loved the poems for how they made him see and hear the shapes of underlying truth. I did not think that they would sing to me. Today, I'm at a bus stop where a guy is leaning, earbuds, t-shirt gleaming white. The arras where the shadow meets the sun exquisitely describes his chest and thigh, confirming rhythms in the bones that run inside his arm, hard lit, but down with light brown hair. For Hale, the point was to surpass the light that's given, make one's own, that one could choose where light and dark's divisions lie. But here I see a ready-made delight, a kind of poetry of edge and mass, and lines remembered from a drawing class. Dan's mute period ended suddenly when we were finally able to bring him to a teacher who taught him to answer questions by spelling the answers. This was a shock, as we didn't know that Dan knew how to spell. That day, July 7th, 2006, began Dan's education, which, as you know, is flourishing today, and ours, too. Lesson. We learn that love and worry cannot cure. There must be some dispassionate insistence, some standard fixed, some distance from which to see the slightest hint of turning. A tiny woman in a tiny room, she leads you, wailing, yet not quite rebelling, to break your spell by spelling. She knows her love must be the love of learning. You learn yourself a letter at a time, and all your teachers wish they'd been the one, and wonder what she's done that they have not for all their love and yearning. How can your breakthrough be that swift and sure? What did you understand? What do you know? We are left stunned and slow to learn to see beyond her first discerning.